you this morning other than a little bedhead there going on? I'm Robin Meade, and let's get the headlines as you try to get ready here. Protesters furious about the George Zimmerman verdict are still marching in the streets. Last night in LA, some of those demonstrations became violent. There are reports of some people being attacked by the protesters and a crowd reportedly breaking into a Walmart. So juror B37 in the George Zimmerman murder trial says she's convinced that the voice that everybody heard screaming on the 911 tapes was that of George Zimmerman. Let's bring in criminal defense attorney Esther Panitch, who's joining us this morning early, and I thank you for doing that. Esther, you know, that juror also said that the jury didn't believe that race had anything to do with this case. So, I mean, that could have been, is that a big point in this trial, in them rendering the verdict, whether race had anything to do with it?
Yes, if they believed that George Zimmerman was stalking Trayvon Martin because he was black, then it may lead into this ill will and malice that was required for second-degree murder. If not, if the jurors believed it was not about race, then it would be about self-defense. And the state, in this case, could not disprove beyond and to the exclusion of every reasonable doubt that it was not self-defense on behalf of George Zimmerman.
So how did the legal teams do? I think it's really interesting to hear from both sides how they grade themselves and each other. So the defense won, so they don't really have to sit there and talk about how they did. Right. So he was in reaction to what the prosecution said about the trial as a whole. How do you feel both sides here did? First of all, the prosecution.
Well, the prosecution, you know, lawyers in court are not casting directors. We don't get to pick our witnesses. So the prosecutors were left with who they were left with. The problem is that they charged him in the first place, knowing that these are the witnesses that they would eventually have to put on. So the fault lies with Angela Corey and her staff deciding to go forward in the first place.
So would you have gone for a lesser charge then to get a conviction?
Well, I always thought, and I know on Monday morning quarterbacking, although I said this at the time of the trial, I thought this second-degree murder was an overreach. But manslaughter was doable. So because you didn't need that level of ill will or racist motive or poor motive in order to convict somebody of manslaughter.
Because how do you prove ill will? That is proving someone's...
It is very difficult.
They don't like to use the term mindset, but you have to prove someone's internal feeling.
That's correct. What they were thinking at the time. So unless George Zimmerman was using racial epithets or doing anything else that was overtly racist, it was going to be nearly impossible for them to get a conviction to second-degree murder.
How do you feel about Mark O'Mara saying, how dare they not accept this verdict from this jury with grace?
Well, I understand that. You know, Mark O'Mara doesn't want to have anyone be a sore loser, but he shouldn't also be a sore winner. So I don't know that his criticism of the prosecution team was necessary. He won. He can be graceful and not comment on what the prosecution has said.
You know, on a personal level, on a human level, I'm surprised to see these folks out talking, because everybody involved in this trial has to be simply mentally and emotionally exhausted.
Yes, and I've done a lot of trial work for almost 18 years. When you lose a trial, and even when you win a trial, you live it after the trial is over. You're constantly waking up in the middle of the night or in the shower, you're thinking, oh, I should have said this or I should have done that. So I understand what they're doing. I'm just surprised, I agree with you, that they're doing it so publicly. They don't need to. You know, they can both kind of retreat to their own sides, lick their wounds, and then move on.
However, on the other side, obviously this is a story, a huge interest for the entire nation. Right. So, I mean, as a media member, I'm grateful they're talking. I'm just thinking on the personal level, wow, I don't know how they're able to sustain it. Yeah. Right. Thank you. Appreciate you. You know, I thought it was interesting how much this jury member remembered. She remembered names. She remembered who said somebody's sounds were left to right or right to left at the complex. So how much of a difference, if you listen to what she said, did it seem to make about the voice, which, by the way, nobody could tell?
That's right.
I mean, not definitively.
Right, and that's why the voice made all the difference. Well, and it added to other witness testimony that, like she said, for example, it corroborated how George Zimmerman got the injuries to the back of his head and to his nose, that he was beaten while he was laying down. George Zimmerman was. So if George Zimmerman was laying down getting beaten up, then the jurors believed that he had a right to defend himself. And that meant, by any justifiable means he had, and he had a weapon on him, and that's what he used.
So this, you know, she said that the jury did not believe, at least she didn't believe, that race was a factor in that. Wasn't that one of, that had to have been a big deciding factor between whether they convicted him of what he was charged with?
Correct. And I think the prosecution was kind of hamstrung from the beginning when the judge said that race was not going to be allowed into the case. So that they could say that George Zimmerman profiled Trayvon Martin, but they were not allowed to say that he was racially profiled. So they were hoping, I presume, that the jury would pick that up for themselves, which they did not. They did not find that George Zimmerman acted with ill will or spite or malice. That's what would have been required under Florida law. And so they didn't find it, and that means a not guilty.
All right. Thank you, Esther. Appreciate you being here.
Of course. Thank you.